Dan, I want to jump right in and let's rewind to the time when you realized that your current tools really weren't cutting it from a case management standpoint, from a matters management standpoint, from an automation standpoint. Go back to that time and you're like, okay, this just isn't cutting it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So that point has occurred many times in my over the last several years, at least twice. So we started originally in I really liked Lawmatics and Locus early on. I was an early adopter of Locus, and they've grown a lot since we use them. Very good, like introductory, all-in-one kind of case management tool. And the automation's there. It does a lot of cool stuff, but I was just kind of wanting to do some unnecessarily ridiculous things. And at the time, I was learning Zapier and figuring out how to do these kind of inter-platform automated sequences. And I fell in with Lawyer on the Beach and Regina Edwards and was enamored with Monday.com. And I was like, look at how you can see everything in this nice, like one display of all your cases and what the status is. And nothing I was using could really do anything like that. So we messed around with Monday.com for a couple of years and just never got it into a position that made a lot of sense. Like you could see kind of everything that was going on, but there was no data model. Like it was just, here's a table of your cases and little status updates, but there was no data model. So there was no contacts connected to the matters. There was no tasks or anything like that connected to the matters. So it was just
wild to
very
me.
decentralized.
That's crazy. That is wild.
You can set it up that way with like mirror properties and linked and stuff, but I didn't realize that until we were already like 3 feet out the door. And it's kind of not a super well developed function of the system. And at one point, I found this Airtable platform. I was like, what the heck is this? Why do I keep hearing this name come up? Why is everybody talking about it? At least where I was looking online in different YouTube channels and stuff. And Airtable launched for the longest time, I thought, oh, it's just this back-end database builder. I don't really care about that. It seems like a kludgier version of Monday.com. And then they came out with this interface system for building your own interface on your database backend. And I started over time gradually understanding like the importance of relational databases and data model and how you tie everything together. And Airtable offered a lot more flexibility. So if you like think about like Lawmatics and Locus and Clio in my case and all that, what they've done is they've taken a database, a relational database, and they've put a pretty face on it, right? So they've abstracted away all that complication. They build the front end, the pretty face for you, right? They build all the buttons for you. They build all the features for you. But with a tool like Airtable, you're taking it one layer down. So you're building both the database and the front end, the way of looking at it. And I realized once we kind of switched over to that and I started building some of my first automations and I was like, oh my God, this is what I've needed. And so that's kind of when we realized that, that's kind of when I realized I wanted more flexibility, more capacity to move data around, do what I wanted with it without being constrained by the limitations of, oh, did they launch this new feature? I think Clio just came out with automations like a couple months ago. And it's like like 15-year-old company or something like that. Not to throw shade, there's a fine platform. But anyway, that's kind of where I realized it and the kind of transition that took place there.
I had made a post in the guild a couple weeks ago, and I think you and I think have opposite perspectives on this. I think, and actually, I don't think we have opposite perspectives. I think that you and I have the same perspective, but I think my expectations are maybe a little bit higher of software companies. Where it was the one where I was talking about how why isn't there like an all-in-one platform? It doesn't make any sense to me why there isn't one. And I understand it does come down to cost and all that, but it's one of those things where whenever I first became a lawyer, like it just never made sense to me why there wasn't some sort of all-in-one solution. And I would make sure people understand what I mean by that. I'm talking about like everything from like bookkeeping, automation, so the CRM part of it, the case management part of it. I am talking about because I think the fact that you've got to go through there's so many the fact that we have a phrase called tech stack to me is frustrating. You know, the fact that you have to have a tech stack where we have
Yeah.
all these softwares talking to each other to me is ridiculous. But
Yeah.
that's the world we're in. So, but I want you to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, there's two things to it. I mean, one is like I mentioned, I think it's kind of inevitable. Like software development is really expensive. Like, and the difficulty is like whenever you're trying to build an all-in-one, like any Joe Schmo that builds a single-purpose tool, like you could have a crack team of 3 developers that writes a tool that does that one thing way better than your omni-purpose tool. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And they're gonna peel away customers. Like if they attract, and as long as the APIs are open and you can automate between the tools pretty easily, like a certain degree of the consumer market is just gonna be like, well, why don't I just use this better single purpose tool? I know how to use Zapier. I know how to use Make. Like I know how to combine these tools. So why don't I just use the single purpose? So I think some of it's just the economics that it's hard to wield a behemoth like that. Some companies can't, like Zoho. They work very hard at creating this gigantic ecosystem, but they also benefit from armies of developers at non-American wage rates.
I love Zoho. You know this. I've used it. But I do. Part of me is like, there's something they do I don't like, and that's they kind of just like rip off what other softwares are doing. Like we use Biggin for our leads. It's a rip off of Pipedrive, is what it is. It's pretty much a knockoff, and the trade off is that the beginning version of it, whatever it is not super great. And then it becomes great eventually. So it becomes the same thing or better. It's just like the trade-off is that whatever they release really early. They come out, they create like a version, and then it's not even a beta version. They release it, and you're kind of whatever the new thing is, it's not great, and then it gets better over time. But that's something I don't like. But the CEO of Zoho, or the former CEO, I don't think he's the CEO anymore, but his whole view on it, he was like the founder, where he wanted to make sure everyone had access to it. That's why it's so cheap. Like he wanted to make sure that everyone has access to it. And I think I like that, as opposed to some of the legal softwares that charge us an arm and leg because we're lawyers.
Yeah. I think it's mostly the legal tax is just, it's coming from the fact that like when you're developing for a niche that's really small, like think about how many people use Zoho, like companies, it's probably in the tens of millions.
Right.
There's only like a few million lawyers in the entire Western world, like English speaking like assuming software dev and English and all that. And even globally, there's probably only less than 10 million, if I had to bet, individuals, and most of whom are working at corporation or at law firms. So like your total addressable market or your TAM is pretty small in law firm tech dev, but you've got to compete with the Airtables, the Monday.coms, the Zoho, the massive multi-industry vertical players with infinite software dev budgets who can service tens or hundreds of millions of customers. It's hard to compete. It's hard to compete, and so they charge higher fees to offset the fact that they have to build a software that's at least as good, or at least comparable, or at least not as so bad that you don't want to use it.
Well, don't you think that
I don't envy them.
Don't you think that their time is running out because of AI and what you can build now? Because you were talking about how you'd have like your team of 3 people that could build out this great like niche product or whatever. But the fact is that you no longer need that team of 3. You could do this much faster and at scale for much cheaper.
Yeah, it's wild. Like there's this whole like category of coding now called vibe coding, which is basically just where devs sit with a microphone and build a custom agent on premises through like Claude or something like that. Yeah. And then they just sit there and curse or whatever and just kind of mumble into the microphone, I need you to edit this. And then like the AI agent just kind of switches stuff around. And, if you're truly a novice and you don't know anything about coding, like, especially if you're trying to launch like an enterprise level software, you're probably gonna have like security problems and you got to be careful what you're doing. You still need to know what you're doing. Well, like somebody who does know what they're doing, equipped with these tools, like there used to be this concept of a 10x engineer or an engineer who's just like 10 times more efficient than other people. They could just spit out code and write stuff. And that's just, some people are just that way. But those people with AI are now like 100x engineers or more. So absolutely. But what's even crazier I follow this guy, Nate Jones, on TikTok. Highly recommend people who are interested in AI to follow him. He's fantastic. But he was talking about how one of the things he predicts, and I think this may be true in the next few years, is just kind of a deterioration of the interface layer of software development in general. So like we're in this world, we've got the Clios and the MySpaces and all, or MyCases and all this stuff. And we interact with these interfaces. We log in and we look at our case system and whatnot. And the prediction is that we're going to see kind of a decline in this whole interface layer, and we're going to be relying predominantly on agents to do a lot of the interfacing. And what's going to matter over the next 5 to 8 years is going to be who's got the cleanest, easiest API that is equipped with a model context protocol server so that LLMs can interact with it easily, that has good data. Like who's got the best, most accessible data for agents. And like I'm sitting here thinking like these companies like Westlaw and LexisNexis and stuff, they've got these huge repository of data. Their APIs are just crap.
Yeah.
So like if somebody comes out there and builds this beautiful case management database, if anybody wants to help me build this,
Yes.
but like, could you do this? But that's kind of my prediction. And one of the things he was talking about too, is that he was spinning up an app. Like he's like, he had an agent. He's like, hey, I need you to build me an app for my day today. I just want to know what's going on. What are the top emails? Like what's on my to-do list? Like what are the action items I should prioritize? And in like 2 minutes, the agent had spun up a custom app for his day. Never be used again. And then the next day he did it again. And he's like, now I just have an agent spin up a new app for my day every day that tells me everything I need to do and has all these buttons to do all the action items that I need to do. He's like, this is going to be what's happening in the next 5 to 8 years.
Yeah, it's to me it's like a massive arms race, and they're all fighting. And I'll get into Thomson Reuters in a second and what they did with Copilot and Casetext pisses me off so much. But yeah, I'm with you. If we can find an army of people to kind of like build out that database and then defeat them, I'd join it in a heartbeat. But